Gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you George Johnson, a man who needs no introduction, a man who is known far and wide for his after-dinner talks, a man who on every occasion has given the best that he has. I give you George Johnson.
Sure, everybody knows George Johnson, and it's certainly true that George is known far and wide for his after-dinner talks, because George bores everybody stiff, has for years. He's usually referred to as Old Stone Face, and is asked to speak only because he's willing and available.
Some of the people of Africa are tall, others are very short. Some are fat, some are thin. You might say that Africa is a mixture of people of different sizes and shapes.
George's audience wish they were somewhere else.
Some of them small.
This guy's terrible. Let's get out of here.
I can't. He's my cousin.
Very fierce.
The trouble with George is he isn't interesting. His topic is interesting, but he doesn't put it across. Now here's a young speaker who is really in demand, because he is interesting. As he talks, he paints a picture with words and with gestures. He leads his audience by the imagination until they almost believe they see the scene he describes.
Some of the people of Africa are very short, while some others are very tall. Some of them are fat and others are thin. You might say Africa is a mixture of peoples of different sizes and shapes.
Recognize the speech? Yes, the words are the same as George Johnson's, but what a difference. John is good. The difference between John and George is not in what they say, but in how they say it. John is animated. He looks alive. George is just talking. George keeps his body rigid and motionless. It lacks any expression whatsoever. And when the body is tied up, the mind too is hampered. For freedom of the body helps in freeing the mind. A good speaker lets his mind and body work together to produce the desired results on his audience. For your audience must be impressed or you're wasting your breath. If you're to impress them, you must interest them. Motion attracts the attention and keeps interest. Ever see people look into a store window? Notice what stops them? Usually it's something that moves. Yes, motion attracts your attention, and if it's interesting enough, it will keep your attention.
It was a dark and stormy day.
A good speaker holds your attention partly by what he says and partly by the way he looks when he says it.
I clutched the large wooden wheel in my hand and gazed out over the bow. And the bow would go up.
Suppose you can't see him, but only hear what he has to say.
And over and down. And soon my stomach likewise was going up.
Yes, he's lost a lot of his punch.
It was a bad day.
A good speaker should be seen as well as heard. The average speaker, such as you and I, is usually afraid to make use of bodily motion in making a speech. He fears he will look foolish, unnatural, and affected. So he feebly waves a finger now and then to indicate that he's still alive, and lets it go at that. But watch that same speaker in a telephone conversation with someone he can't even see. By his expression and his gestures, he expresses mild surprise, mirth, anxiety, and even anger. His mind and his body are working together because he's being natural, since he knows nobody's watching him. Watch a pair of ladies discuss a new spring outfit. If you think gesturing is unnatural, they're so interested in what they're talking about, they've forgotten someone might be watching them. Their minds and bodies are... Oops, sorry, ladies. The odd thing is that even speakers like George usually unbend and speak normally in familiar surroundings. When George gets home from his speech, he's really forceful in telling his wife how well he thinks he spoke and how well he was received by his large audience. The trick in using gestures is, of course, in using them correctly. Gestures generally fall in two main classes: the gesture used for description and the gesture used for emphasis. The descriptive gesture is just what the name implies. It helps the speaker lead his audience into the scene he describes by creating an imaginary picture.
On that early October morning, the air was clear and brisk, and you could smell the bacon frying over an open fire. And above us loomed the majestic Rockies, being awakened by the warm, gentle fingers of morning sun. And we stood there, the two of us, side by side, and didn't speak.
But be careful in your use of the descriptive gesture. Be careful that you don't lead attention away from yourself. Your audience will usually follow your direction, and if you lead them off into the distance by looking in that direction, you may have trouble getting their interest back to you. Keep your eyes on the audience. One of the greatest uses of the gesture is for emphasis, when what you have to say is important, and you want to make it seem that way.
Even if we had paid only $5 for it, instead of $500,000, we'd have been cheated. $500,000 for a plant that was practically bankrupt. No, gentlemen, there can be no justice until there is fair play for all parties concerned.
Speaking with gestures is speaking naturally, speaking the way you speak on the telephone to someone you know. Using motions to help your audience visualize what you're talking about, the way you do when you describe your new clothes. Yes, speaking with gestures is speaking naturally, the way you speak in the privacy of your own home, with your own family. Use gestures to help free your body and your mind, so that what you say will sound and look real and sincere. Use motion to attract and hold the attention of your audience. Yes, you too can be an interesting speaker, one whom people will want to hear, about whom people will say, "This fellow's good." Then to you will come the satisfaction of knowing you are a good speaker. Having seen this motion picture, many of you in this audience will realize it was made especially for your benefit, to help you in your speech. Yes, this picture was aimed directly at you. And you may go home and look in your mirror and say to yourself that with a little practice in the use of gestures, you might be the speaker you always thought you were.
It doesn't make any difference whether they're tall or short. They come all sizes in Africa. I thank you.